reports, and there is a motion that Mike Sullivan be heard.
Moved by Councillor McCabe will move, second by Councillor Burback. All in favor? Opposed of any, and that's unanimous. And Mr. Sullivan, the floor is yours when you.
Thank you. Tonight, the latest closed meeting investigation report was tabled. The investigators looked at all in-camera council meetings between September 2018 and May of 2023. There was 142 meetings to determine whether votes were taken illegally. I hope you've at least had a chance to read the summary and recommendations, but it's a pretty big document. If you haven't read it all, I'll understand. The investigation found that at 127 of those meetings where votes took place, 1/3 of council's voting was illegal. Of the 416 votes, 281 were legitimate and 135 should have been held in public meetings. That is on average more than one a meeting. What kind of votes were these? Some were votes taken in portions of the meeting that had no business being in secret. So those should have just been not enclosed. But most of the illegal votes were decisions made by council. And council's not allowed to make decisions in secret, not substantive ones. In some of those cases, the decisions were never revealed to the public. In other cases, the decision was made in secret and then ratified by a second public vote that merely rubber stamped the decision taken in secret. In some cases, the decision was to give council powers to the CAO to enter into contracts or hire specialists. In one fairly recent case, the council gave the power to the CAO to issue her own RFP and then independently enter into contracts for the city of $300,000 or less. That was never revealed to the public. The investigator noted that the frequency of illegal voting diminished after his earlier report, coincident with the new council being elected, but it did not stop entirely. And there were far fewer meetings after that point, as many of the meetings last year were for training the new council, and they didn't have any votes. Some of you might argue that this is old news and that the Sheeny days are long past, that these are relatively minor infractions and not worth worrying about. Neither is really the case. The violations of the law continued long after the Sheeny debacle was over. And while some of the violations were minor, many were substantive decisions of council deliberately hidden from the public. Some might argue that this is a new council and you should not be burdened with the behavior of the old council. However, 5 of you were on that old council, and the fact that the investigator found examples of illegal votes during your term means that old habits die hard. There is no penalty in law for council's misbehavior, if you can call it misbehavior. But who is responsible for creating the mess in the first place? The clerk creates the agenda for each meeting, including determining which items should be in camera. It is then up to council to decide whether to follow the clerk's agenda or to move items off the in-camera agenda and discuss items in public. And as you all know, 12 of the 14 reasons you can hold things in camera are optional. They are not mandatory. But on all the occasions of closed meetings since 2018, only once has one councillor attempted to move an item into the public meeting, and his attempt failed for a lack of seconder. In terms of voting, at public meetings, it is often the case that a draft motion is part of a staff report. Council can ignore it, or amend it, or vote to accept it, or vote it down. The same is likely true at in-camera meetings, though the minutes are not generally publicly available, so I don't know. So for many of the votes, it is again the clerk who places the draft motions on the agenda for council, and then council can amend or reject. The present CAO was the clerk for much of the time examined in this report. In terms of process, it is generally the clerk who advises council on what motions can and cannot be brought and voted on. It is the clerk who best understands the rules of procedure and advises on such. But in the end, it is the chair of the meeting and council who are responsible for knowing the rules and following them. For much of the time in the present report, Dan Matheson was the chair. It is now Mayor Ritzma. The clerk has now recommended that this report be forwarded to the city solicitor for review before acting on any recommendations in the report. With all due respect, that same city solicitor was present for many of the meetings in which illegal votes were taken, without apparently advising council that they were acting illegally. I'm not sure how much more information, how much more help she can be. The closed meeting investigator has made several clear recommendations and has offered to attend and answer any questions from council. The law requires that council receive the report and pass a resolution stating how it intends to deal with the findings of the investigation. Spending more money to get more legal advice is not a wise use of tax dollars, in my opinion, but that's up to you. He recommends that council get more training. I agree. He recommends that council stop having resolutions on more than one topic. That was one of the things he found in this examination, was that council would have 4 or 5 different issues in one resolution, some of which should have been in public and some of which could be in secret. He recommends that council ensure that their resolutions are clearly worded and do not make substantive decisions. And that's the fundamental problem with being in camera, is you have a long discussion and you want to make the decision, but you can't. You can't make the decision until you come back in public. And you can't make it and then ratify it. That's not permitted. He recommends that council set up a process to move out of in-camera back into open session when you've discovered that the subject matter you're discussing is not something that should be in camera. And that's happened on a number of occasions in his examination. He recommends that council and staff holistically review their in-camera votes to avoid having the same issues in the future. These clear recommendations can form the basis of a council resolution. Council can and should heed his advice, and I would urge you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from council? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item.
Through your worship, keeping to your